Hello everybody, my name is Riesland Mark and welcome to another edition of Creating a Humanist Blockchain Future, where we focus on the intersection of effective altruism, universal basic income, the attention economy, and blockchain. And today, in episode number 5, we're going to focus on the overlap of two of those, effective altruism and blockchain, namely blockchain for social good. And we're going to be interviewing Meens, who lives in the Netherlands and leads blockchain entrepreneurship at multiple incubators there at Techruption and Brightlands, which focus on blockchain for good projects like climate change. Vince, welcome to the show and welcome.
Welcome. Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So let's kind of just start with the dive in, and I always like to start with why, essentially. And could you tell me a little bit about why you're working in the blockchain for social good space, and specifically why Techruption and Brightlands?
I think maybe the first thing to start off with is this thing from philosophy called the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept. So for the people that don't know it yet, it's basically if the two of us get arrested, and we get the opportunity to snitch on the other for our own benefit, we will screw over the other person. Basically, that's in our human nature. Yep. Instead of both shouting up and staying a bit longer in it, but then we're both out. And I think if you look at the world, how it works now, it's actually a reflection of this mechanism that because all the transactions that we do are something where we can get away with things very easily. We easily screw over other things in the world. So if I buy this shirt and I'm not seeing the person in the sweatshop, I feel perfectly okay to buy the shirt because it's not tangible for me to feel responsible for it. And this is something I think this is the major thing to get about the blockchain is that every transaction that will happen will start having this string attached to it of its history, of the people that it impacted, and so on. So you will get this major shift of the where I think as society for the first time we're going to break the prisoner's dilemma because we're going to see that the quick win for ourselves is not the good win for all of us. And that's what blockchain is going to facilitate. And that's why I got super excited once I heard about it to get involved into the space.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that a lot of people in the blockchain space think from that, what I call like a root cause perspective, which is, hey, and you're essentially talking about, game theory, and we talk about game theory a lot in the blockchain space, and hey, what are the game theoretical implications of X, and you're saying, the game theoretical implications of something like blockchain allow us to realign incentives in such a way that we don't have the prisoner's dilemma to such an extent, or that we don't have something like a tragedy of the commons. So that makes sense. And so could you tell us just a little bit more, just a bit of background on kind of the work that you're doing, kind of diving into the stuff that you're doing at Techruption around blockchain for social good? What are some of the projects that you're working on there?
Yeah, so maybe one step back is this initiative called Brightlands. It has a slogan called "Knowledge Crossing Borders," and I think this is also very much in the blockchain mindset, so to say. I think we're moving in a time where no longer a single organization or a single industry can tackle the problems that we're facing. We're moving into this global connected world where problems become too difficult to tackle on your own. And that's essentially at Brightlands, we try to combine several industries like the materials industry, the food industry, the smart services industry, and these things together to tackle global things. And within Brightlands, we have an initiative called Techruption that basically offers a playground for blockchain, artificial intelligence, and climate change. And this especially got my interest because I'm a tech guy at heart. So combining these things, the only thing missing still is VR, but then my heart would beat really hard. I thought that it was a thought-provoking approach to tackle climate change through a blockchain mindset, and not so much through a mindset where you say, "Hey, I'm going to put some solar panels on my roof," but really start looking at it like how can we create a data view of society that we can start incentivizing better behavior, and that this better behavior might have way more impact than just this more efficient device that I'm buying or these kind of things. So I thought this was something I wanted to commit to. So within the Techruption, we basically bring together big corporates like banks or financial institutions like pension funds and so on the one hand, and we try to combine them with startups that basically enter into a market, have no clue about regulation or all kinds of things that are in place, and they just start challenging each other to start working on these blockchain use cases that are relevant for all of us. And they do this basically in a context where they don't think about proprietary stuff. They just experiment, they share knowledge, and they build something until you can test it in the market. And once it reaches that point, people say like, okay, now we're going to continue this and build it as a startup ourselves, or we're going to include it in our business, for example. So we basically are literally this playground for the new world, like a mini Garden of Eden to experiment.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that it reminds me of a couple things. First, this concept of ideas that are too big to tackle on your own, and what blockchains can kind of enable here is this new collaborative mindset. And you saw it at these blockchain conferences at Consensus 2017. You had NASDAQ and Citigroup and a blockchain group called Chain. The three of them worked together on this new kind of blockchain-based NASDAQ solution, which would have been, when they were talking about it, they were talking exactly what you said, which is like, hey, back in the day, this would have been hard. Who owns the siloed data? Who gets the returns, whatever. But blockchain just says, hey, the data exists on the blockchain. It's kind of open for everybody, and maybe we can tokenize it to some extent so that the returns are divided in kind of like a platform cooperativism way or whatever. So I think that is a very strong thing that you're getting at, which is we both need the cooperation in order to actually solve problems, and blockchain kind of enables that cooperation. So that's one thing that I liked what you said. And the second thing is about this data. You said with this new data view of society, instead of just getting new solar. New solar panels, we can change the behavior to make more impact. And I really like that perspective, because it's a kind of, if you multiply, I think a lot of people underestimate. I just finished this book called Machine Platform Crowd, and a lot of people underestimate the power of the crowd. But if you can change the behavior, change the habits of a lot of people within the space, wow, then you can have a huge impact on things within the space. So I really like that as well.
Yeah. And I think there's also like a lot of inefficiency in the world because we don't know what other people are doing that much. Like one thing, for example, with energy is that it's nice to have a solar panel on the roof, but if the main power plant for the centralized grid isn't aware of your production capacity, then it's not aligned. And I think with a lot of these things, we can really gain from having the centralized or centralized, decentralized. Exactly. This universal means of seeing each other's data and having this standardized. It will trigger a lot of more optimization.
Exactly. So could you talk a little bit more about one project that I'm excited by that you guys are working on is, and kind of, especially at the funding side, I've talked with some people in the space around, and we might talk about this later, about how people conceive of value for value exchange within the blockchain for social good space. But one thing that's really exciting that's happening in the Netherlands is you have the government actually pushing for some of these climate change initiatives. So can you talk about like some of the laws that they've made around like pension funds and the 20% and things of that variety?
Yeah, like basically, I think as a world, we went through a peak oil, and I think we're also going now through peak capitalism, so to say. And that basically means that the whole motives for organizations to exist start shifting away from being purely for profit and start moving towards this B Corp mindset of making impact. And one of these, like in the Netherlands, we kind of have a luxury pension environment. Like people are very, very strict in contributing to it. So we have very wealthy funds. And I think like the pension funds together, like they all committed to have 10% of their don't pin me on these numbers. I need to check it exactly. Somewhere in that field of their total asset base to commit this to tackling climate change. And I think yeah, if you look at the scale of what they're doing, like it's the size of 2 times a company like Apple, for example, basically now moving into this space and having all the resources to coming up with real cool things. Not so much in the traditional things of just putting up windmills, but really also looking into supporting really innovative startups and who think with blockchain or AI solutions to tackle these things, and not just with hardware. And I think this is something unprecedented, like the scale that they're doing this and the scale that they're actually opening up their international network and their whole how do you say it? Their whole position to impact governments and these things. And yeah, I think it's really a tipping point in that sense, and it also feels like this mini revolution of doing good. And I see like this different mindset now than just doing things for profit, just getting like this these double-digit growth numbers or whatever. It doesn't cut it anymore. You're not gonna feel satisfied at the end of the day if you didn't contribute to a better world for your children. And a lot of people are waking up to this realization. And the scale that it is happening at now, I feel confident that we're going to tackle the problems ahead. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I love the optimism. Hopefully,
yeah.
And it's cool to hear optimism, because I think a lot of people are pessimistic, about what this space looks like going forward. And I think it's really cool. Also, I mean, with you're living like in America right now. I don't know of very many. There are a bunch of, I don't know of any big kind of institutional investors that are thinking in a similar way that these pension funds are thinking. There's some other projects out here, like something like the Founders Pledge, where people are like, doing 2% funding, to like charities after they have an exit. There are also things like the Giving Pledge, which is where lots of billionaires have said, once we die, or by the time we die, we're going to give either half or more than half. Yeah. And that one's one where I kind of want to expedite that, where it's like, okay, the time is now, let's start funding these things. And I really like what you said about, our mindset. You're right in that we're seeing this big shift into these B corporations, Founders Pledge, Pledge 1%, those kinds of things. And I think that it's something that I'm excited by, and this Mark Zuckerberg was talking about this in his Harvard commencement address, was, hey, we need to move away from, measuring what you measure for, you optimize for, and if measuring away from measuring GDP and money necessarily, and towards measuring things like happiness, which we can talk about later as well. But I think that is kind of what you're getting at, which is, hey, let's create people that are excited by working on solutions that don't necessarily just, go back to themselves, but work for the greater good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also this has to do with like a bit of an off-topic startup, for example, here at campus. They build the sensor to detect your mood. Oh. Like, for example, if you're happy or stressed. And they're now doing an experiment where they basically track like which people bring happiness and which people trigger stress. It sounds a bit scary maybe, but it's very interesting because it creates trigger points for the people that are stressed to go into dialogue very quickly. But it also creates like a momentum for us as a group to start really being aware of the impact we have on others, instead of just thinking like, hey, I got grumpy out of bed, I'm gonna walk grumpy to my desk and stay grumpy the whole day. No, you're really thinking like, okay, I'm part of this group and I have an impact on it, and I need to be aware that whatever I bring to the table, it will reflect through 7 layers of other people maybe during the day, and I need to become aware of this. And it's the same with how we consume. It's the same with what we watch. All these things, like our impact is way bigger than we perceive, and I think that's becoming very tangible with these new tech things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to dive into that for just a quick second more before we go back to some of the other stuff that you're doing at Techruption. So what you're talking about there is very much in alignment with what we were talking about before, about the data view of society, where we can kind of, once we have everybody who's hyper networked with smartphones and an Internet of Things with 20 billion devices by 2020 or whatever, you have this, you can essentially take data slices of reality for any given point in time, and things that a lot of people traditionally think you wouldn't be able to track, like, emotions. Like, maybe the data thing will exist for like the financial system or whatever, but not for emotions. But what you're saying is, hey, we actually will have this kind of data view of what emotional state us and others are bringing to the table at any given time. I think that's a fascinating concept. is there any worry that you have there as we kind of get into this quantification of all the things and the tracking of all the things? Have you seen the Black Mirror episode where they're rating people 5 stars?
Yeah, yeah.
So are you worried by this kind of like, hey, I come into a room and I immediately know, oh man, other people feel colder about me because maybe I'm ugly or maybe the clothes I'm not wearing, like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think two things. One, in my perception, Black Mirror isn't fully aware yet of the blockchain.
No, I know.
I think it was still a very centralized approach for this reputation system. I think also the fact to build blindly reputation and just if you compare it to a keychain and just having one key with all the reputation, I think is a very bad way to approach this. I think every human should have like this virtual keychain where maybe 1,000 different reputation compartments for different things can build up. I think this is very important to compartmentalize these things. The scary aspect, I think still living in the space where a centralized company like Google likes to build an advertising profile on all these things and so on. That's of course like the bad side, but I think they will get challenged anyway by their competitive advantage of owning all this data and it going to the public. So I think in the transition phase, some companies will try to benefit from it, but in the end they will not be able to, and they will become obsolete. So I think for the short term, yes, it's a bit scary, and yes, some data might get misused. But 5 to 10 years from now, we'll look back on this period as a transition phase, and it will all make sense.
Yeah, no. And I think, and like you're saying, some of these things are also, there's kind of an inevitability to a lot of this, in the sense that's like, hey, it's whether it's you and I working on it, we're going to be, there's going to be an increasingly measured and datafied world, and whether or not you or I are doing it, there are going to be reputation systems. You have China making this big social credit reputation system. So it's like if something is centralized as well, and if something is going to be, if something's going to happen, then you can try to say, okay, I just want to be part of this wave and make it as good as possible for the people, because it's just going to be true. The other thing that reputation makes me think of is this concept of like what our profiles look like in the future. And so like for a given profile, you have like in the classic like Uport example is, hey, I have a profile and it has a given reputation score on it, and it's self-sovereign identity and things of that variety, but something, and then it would be connected to these various personas that you could have of the, here's my financial persona or my social persona. Something that I'm interested by 2 things in this space. The first is imagining a series of smart contracts on a given person's profile where it says, hey, I am at any given point in time, if you want to pay me $5 to do an interview of you, that's a smart contract that I do. Or if you want me to do an Uber, essentially everybody right now has a meta smart contract on themselves for Ubering or Lyfting or whatever. So I'm interested by the smart contracts as essentially the new definition of who you are is the series of smart contracts that you have. And the second part is this question of, can we track, and then specifically, and I'd like to get your take on this one, within the social good space, we'll have like reputation. I think that a lot of people are conceiving of reputation as like, reputation in business dealings. How are you doing interacting with others? Is it good? But something that I'm interested by is like, not only your reputation in terms of like the actual interactions, but like also who are you trying to do good for? And should people have a reputation for like, hey, I'm a person who's actively doing good for the world, and it's, we're tracking it in these ways, and that I'm very far on the edge of like doing good for others, while someone else, not necessarily this is better or worse, might be doing more good for themselves. What do you think about a reputation system that's kind of blocked, like social good adjacent?
Yeah, I think it's very important. Like for me, the most ridiculous thing right now is the resume for the job interview, where basically we all create this perfect template of our perfect life and perfect behavior, whereas it doesn't really say anything about us. I think in the future, if you want to work with someone, the biggest thing is going to be a verifiable proof of who you are, and then I don't mean your address or your name or your picture. No, like, okay, you say you want to work for social good, but let's see in your behavior if you're not a hypercritic person trying to greenwash yourself, so to say. But if you're really consistent with it, if you really live it, and like I work here a lot in our region, we have some regions with heavy unemployment under young people. And I think the biggest thing I see there is this disconnection gap, like not having 100 people on a first name basis working that can introduce you somewhere. Like these kind of things become way more valuable than the skill you learn in a school. It's going to be about making it tangible that if I don't know you yet, that I can quickly see if you're at least similar to me, instead of fully just seeing this advertised version of yourself in a resume. No, I want to see if you act like me, if you think like me, and therefore we can work together. And that creates like a trust point for people that are now not interacting with each other to easily start interacting with each other. And that's like also the slogan of blockchain in the end, the trust machine. It's building this common ground to feel comfortable to work with anyone and to tackle something together instead of staying individual. And that's something I really, really like. Yeah.
Totally. We are en route to the abstraction of trust and the abundance of trust, and towards the human organism, or what have you. Yeah. So could you, like, coming back to Techruption for a second, and asking about the project that you guys are working on with carbon tax and kind of carbon emissions. Could you talk a little bit more about the work that you guys are doing on that space and how you expect that to go forward? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing is just getting like a good footprint of what a product really is. A product always has the story attached to it of where it came from, how it was transported, and who handled it, and so on. And if the blockchain becomes like this basic layer where I can see, okay, it was plucked from the ground here, then transported on a ship, then moved here, I can make it very tangible to estimate the footprint of me consuming this here. And I think that's the first step to have like these transport footprint taxes, so to say, on products, instead of just having a cheap product. Like here we eat a lot of avocados for breakfast for some reason since a couple of years, and I always find I find it amazing that this thing basically crossed half the globe to be on the breakfast plate of someone for less than €1. This is like the fact that you can get it there cheap doesn't mean that the price is not paid in different values, not paid in in financial sense. It might be cheap to get it there, but the footprint of this oil tanker or the footprint of this airplane or these kind of things to get it there, it's not in the equation. I think we should go towards more holistic ways of pricing things, where we take these things way more into consideration than just the price of production. This is also something like I think we're going to move away for paying for the commodities. Like, for example, if you have a car, now you pay for 1 gallon of fuel. But with blockchain, the computer of your car will get connected to the gas station, because they share the same blockchain as a common ground to interact. And instead of then paying for this gallon of fuel, you will start paying for how you use that gallon of fuel. And you will start, for example, paying if you drive polluting more for that gallon than if you drive really eco-friendly. And I think these kind of smart connections, where the business model shifts from just paying for a product and then having no responsibility to seeing the impact of how you use it or where it comes from, it will totally shift a lot of these things. And one other example, I gave it before, is how energy production is so misaligned. And we produce so much energy everywhere, and people try to give it back to the grid, but the power plants also overproduce, and there's like this total mismatch, I think, of local energy production and local water production. Like, we're also here working on decentralized water grids that create like a global water exchange, for example, on the blockchain, making drinking water a universal basic right again for everyone, instead of having these controlled water grids, for example. These kind of things.
Yeah. And so that makes a lot of sense, and I'd like to dive into some of that stuff in a second, but could you talk a little bit more? Is there a specific like project that you guys are working on within like the carbon tax or kind of the transportation space? And could you give me some more specifics on that?
Yeah, actually, there's one big project in the logistics industry with this, but it's still it's still under
Yeah.
some non-disclosure.
Yes. Cool. Cool. Cool.
But it has to do primarily with really making it tangible what the whole journey is of everything, and thereby including a tax on that instead of just paying for the product. And I think in the end, therefore, you will get a shift where you will get a shift back to local. Now we live in this fully globalized society where we think something is cheap because we get it from far. But we will start shifting back that you will get taxed to transport things over great distances because it will impact the environment a lot. And we will therefore have a revolution back to the local production, the local consumption. And I think local farmers will definitely get way better times. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a kind of a macro trend within the blockchain space, which is kind of this bimodal distribution between, if you're working in the space, you're kind of required to work in this hyper decentralized, globalized way.
Yeah.
We're talking many time zones, thousands of miles away from each other, because there's so much great stuff happening everywhere. So like, let's use the truly global crowd. And at the same time, it empowers some of these like local trust communities and easier. You don't need centralized tracking things because you can track essentially more easily with the blockchain. So you can it enables hyper local as well. So it kind of enables both sides of that bimodal. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to the middle ground. If you're like 500 miles away from me, do I care about you? I'm not sure.
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. Yeah.
Perhaps. Cool. So. Let's kind of, in the last couple minutes here, we've kind of been toying with a little bit of these macro concepts in addition to some of the stuff within Techruption. But one thing that Vince and I want to talk about, instead of diving into one of those other concepts, is, in this transition to this kind of macro, more abstract thing, Vince, I'd like to get your take on how we can track value within the blockchain for social goods space. This is something that a lot of people are thinking about because it's a smart contract is an easy way to do a direct one-to-one value for value transaction where you say, hey, I'm going to give you this thing and you're going to give me this things back, and great, we value for valued, all good. But what happens if, let's say, Vince, you want to give me some money and then I'm actually providing you with no value. I'm providing someone else with value, let's say maybe some poor person or maybe for the macro environment. How do you think about kind of tracking that value and also incentivizing it to be the case that you give me money for the greater good?
Yeah, I think this is actually a great example of where we started with the Prisoners thing. Because now if I look at bank accounts, your bank account is hidden from me, mine is hidden from yours. And basically if I transact something to you, there's no way for me to track things or see what happens and so on. So I think for a model like this to work, and me just depending upon your promise that you will help someone else in return for the thing that I did for you, it's intangible. But with the blockchain, it of course becomes something transparent where I can not only keep track of if you will actually add value to others, but I'm also able to see before I transact with you what you did in the past. So I think I have this very complete view of your contributions to others to assess if I want to do a transaction with you. And I think now most bank accounts, of course, they're only transacting money. I think in the future you will maybe store where you are, if you were next to a person, whether you were nice to someone, whether you like their Facebook post, all these things, they will all be added to this new kind of bank account on the blockchain. And therefore, every transaction will start with finding other values in each other before you start exchanging money. And in most cases, you have the six degrees of separation concept. Basically, I believe that we also have a lot of shared circles. So if I look in your second network, probably there's an overlap with people in the Netherlands or people in my life or whatever. And I think over time, and this is something that gets kickstarted in a small community, you will see that I will have impact on some family in Iraq, and I will have impact on some farmer in China, and because it becomes super visible. And this is something that's going to motivate me to I think be very considerate of that I'm making sure that I contribute as well, because other people will see these things from me. And I think therefore in the future also things like war comes out of the ability to separate people. I think in the future, if I see how I'm connected to other countries, other regions, other things, it becomes way less acceptable to deal with these things. And I will feel even more empowered every time I see that I impacted some farmer somewhere to keep doing it. I think it will be like a gamified sense of purpose or something like that.
Yeah, that's very in line with this interview that I just gave a couple days ago about you said a gamified sense of purpose, and we were talking about a quantified. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the very top you have self-actualization and kind of how do we quantify meaning and how do we quantify purpose. It's very in line with what you're saying. The other thing that makes me think of is, so you're essentially what you're saying is you think that in order to track value for value in going forward in the future, that the primary first way that we're going to do that is by essentially choosing the people that we want to transact with based on their kind of social good reputation. Is that right?
Yeah. I think, for example, in a neighborhood, maybe you have some people that are lonely. Maybe you have some people that cannot fix their own garden anymore, or these kind of things. I think the people that pick this up, they are invaluable to a community. So maybe these people should be able to live for free in that community, because it will become very tangible what they contribute. And I think you will have a lot of these models where basically it will begin where a community basically crowdfunds the existence of someone that contributes a lot, and it will gradually trickle down to people that do a bit less but still contribute. And in the end, it will shift towards seeing that 2-3 layers of interaction will actually lead to a contribution that is also beneficial for yourself or something like this. It's a gradual process, but it will start with like these super doing good people in each neighborhood being supported by their whole neighborhood. I think that's a very good place to start.
Yeah, I like that. And there's a it reminds me of, there's this universal basic income implementation called resilience, which uses a similar concept where you essentially know based off this thing called a tax-eme, so like a genetic version of a tax, should I operate with you, you can essentially, it makes transparent what kind of social good you're doing, and then kind of when people are kind of self-taxing each other, people are incentivized to go towards the people who are doing better, because then that kind of provides more money back to the system.
Exactly.
So I guess we're pretty much out of time for today, but I like the conversation. So what is there one, in conclusion, is there one final thing that you'd like to say to the listener? It can be silly, self-promoting, off topic, anything. What's on your mind?
I think the most interesting thing for me is it's a bit on topic for blockchain, is that timeline-wise, you need to start thinking differently. Like now we're very much focused on doing something for earning our paycheck every month or these kind of things. But with blockchain, we start building this universal record of history together. And even 10, 15 years from now, people will see the choices that I made, or they will be able to see what I contributed. And I think therefore we need to start thinking way more long term. Like if I look at the past where we built pyramids or these things, and we worked for 3 generations to build a building, I think we're doing very little of those long-term projects. But with the blockchain, we can really start thinking again, like, okay, let's do something for the generations to come by building now the groundwork for this. And this is something I think we should all embrace. That's
Yeah, I like that, and I think that there's an embracing and an opportunity side there, and there's also a little bit of a fear side there, where if you get a Uport persona or some kind of self-sovereign identity on the blockchain, well, it pretty much starts tracking you then. So whatever you do, although there may not be systems in place at the time that are actively looking at your blockchain transactions in the future, they might. But I like the other version of that, which is the empowering version, not so much the fear version. So for me, the other takeaways here are in kind of what we talked about today. So we talked about first, Vince is working in the space primarily from a game theoretical and tragedy of the commons or prisoner's dilemma perspective, and he's really excited by this ability, and he's working specifically in this space where essentially it's a playground for people to collaborate, and blockchain really enables a lot of that collaboration, and specifically around some of these new kind of government pushed initiatives within the Netherlands that essentially fund these collaborations to do good, because just making money is not necessarily the key aspect of the game these days. So the motivations for corporations to exist is kind of changing, and so that allows people like Vince to work more in the climate change space. And we also talked a little bit about some of these more macro concepts around this data view of society and this kind of reputation view of society, and whether people will be able to tell whether you've been doing good or bad. And then we talked also a bit about some of the carbon tax work that Vince is doing, and specifically around the ability for blockchains to track externalities, classic kind of provenance checking here, and we're able to now inject the externalities into the equation, which we weren't able to do before. So that's what we talked about. Vince, thank you so much for being on the show today, and I hope you're doing well out there, and thanks all for listening. If you want to check out Vince or any of the work he's doing, go to Techruption or Brightlands or Vince Meens. You can find him on the internet by Googling. And if you want to support me on Patreon, go to patreon.com/RhysLandmark. That's /RhysLandmark. Thanks so much, everybody, and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.